can in fact permit the continued existence of a group of lawbreakers, because if they do, then the law itself ultimately comes into disrepute.
Part of the pirates' attraction was their spontaneity and vitality, which was a novelty at the time. Capital's Tommy Vance was a disc jockey on both Caroline and Big L in the heyday of the pirates.
Oh, very frequently things went wrong. In fact, I think some of the major politicians at that time considered the whole thing to be a total disaster anyway, though I've never concurred with what they thought. Things like, I mean, people never arrived in the newsroom on time, ever. So you can, now over to so-and-so with the news. Oh, well, he's not there. Don't worry, let's play another record. There was that sort of attitude about it. Disasters galore.
Here's the current Caroline temperature check, and I think we'll possibly have time for about one, possibly two more this morning on the Mike A Show.
We can see now that the pirates had a tremendous effect on the whole music industry.
The effect of Caroline on the whole rock music thing of the 60s was like so enormous. I mean, I even had people like George Harrison and John Lennon say to me at various times, you know, that the input was just enormous, the impact of that, and it sort of suddenly made England a music, you know, suddenly was musically conscious on a pop level.
Caroline's Sure Shot!
It's hard to overestimate the effect of the enormous increase in exposure the pirates offered to the music world. New smaller record companies got a chance to get their products heard, and many new bands like the Moody Blues, for example, owed much of their success to the pirates. And the opportunities for advertising made the pirates popular with the non-music world too.
It was a leg in at a very cheap price for the small man, the small shopkeeper, the small guy, to get going, to get his business on the road. Couldn't buy television then because it was £1,000 a second or whatever, but he could buy Caroline, and all of that, you know, on that level was terrific as well. I mean,
advertise on Radio Caroline and make 1965 your boom year. Sell on Radio Caroline.
And as for the pirate chiefs themselves, they weren't exactly short of a bob or two.
Rates and a listening audience of millions.
Well, it was just enormous. I mean, it was just ridiculous. It was, you know, there was just so much revenue that, you know, coming, you know, to.
For 3 years, the Skull and Crossbones ruled the airwaves, filling the pirates' chests with gold and introducing to Britain the delights of all-day pop and giving a start to many of our best-known DJs. Caroline boasted Tony Blackburn, Simon D, Dave Lee Travis, Emperor Roscoe, Roger Scott, Tommy Vance and Johnny Walker. Blackburn and Vance also worked for Big L, Radio London, as did Dave Cash, Kenny Everett, Ed Stewart and John Peel. Then, on the 15th of August 1967...
the government introduced the Marine Offences Act, a piece of legislation designed to make it impossible for the pirates to continue.
The two principal arguments for the 1967 Act were that unregulated broadcasting might interfere with emergency services, such as distress signals, and that anyway, the 1948 Copenhagen Plan, which had allocated all the European broadcasting frequencies, left no room for any further British radio channels.
In fact, for these two reasons, many European governments, including Britain, had signed the Strasbourg Agreement in 1965. This meant we were honour bound to introduce legislation to protect European government authorised stations from interference by unauthorised stations. However, advances in broadcasting technology would probably have made it possible to allocate frequencies to the pirates. After all, since 1967, we've managed to find room under international law to fit in 20 local BBC stations and 19 independent commercial ones like Capital and LBC. The most serious charge was the possibility of interference with emergency services. Although there doesn't seem to be any evidence that this ever happened, the worry that it might one day was obviously a powerful influence on the decision to bring in the Act. But was there another, more emotional reason for sinking the pirates? Sir John Foster, former MP and expert on international law, thinks so.
Where I think the whole basis is wrong is that the British governments, Labour and Conservative, had an insane hatred of commercial radio. Insane. And so they allowed literally tens of millions of pounds, perhaps hundreds of millions of pounds from the start, from before the war, to go to Radio Luxembourg, paid by English advertisers, when they could have set a pole up in London, called it Radio Ruritania or Utopia, and if somebody didn't like commercial radio, they could have listened to the BBC. Because I think that's the end of the argument. If you don't like it, you listen to something else. And of course, starting from this insane hatred, that's why they passed the Marine Offences, etc. Act of 1967.
This is a Caroline gale warning.
And so they all closed except one. As the hour of midnight on the 14th of August approached, millions of listeners tuned in anxiously to see what would happen to the newly renamed Radio Caroline International's intention to continue despite the act.
This has been Caroline Newsbeat.
This is Radio Caroline. It is now 12 midnight. Welcome to the new phase of broadcasting from Caroline. I want you to remember something. That is, a station that belongs to you and is right cannot ever be taken away from you.
And almost a decade later, she's still there. In part two, we'll be taking a closer look at the act and how Caroline managed to continue where the others have folded. Also, with a bit of luck, we should have reached the Amigo by then, and we'll be able to see what she looks like and maybe have a chat with some of the people on board. I'll see you then. Oh, sorry. Ah! Oh, it's doing it again! Hello? I'm sorry, I'm not very used to doing this. What's the weather been like out here?
It's been okay, it hasn't been rough at all.
Not rough?
Not in the last week or so anyway.
That's more you can say for our trip out here. Most people have been sick.
Nobody's ever said go aboard this ship, it's great.
You might wonder why I'm hailing them through a loudspeaker rather than doing what would be much easier, and that's just go on board. Well, the Marine Offences Act doesn't actually make it illegal for me to go on board, but it does make it illegal for the captain of this boat to encourage me to go there. So that's why I won't be going. It also makes it illegal to install or take out radio apparatus, which you know is going to be used for offshore broadcasting. It's illegal to advertise on the station or even to publish advertisements for it. And it's also illegal to help the station in any way by taking supplies, either food or records or anything like that, in a British boat.
So how does Caroline get to be still here despite the act? Well, first of all, whilst the station is illegal, it is not possible to prosecute it under the Marine Offences Act. The ship is not British. Lloyd's Register of Shipping record it as being owned by a Panamanian company, Rosebud Shipping SA, and it's anchored outside British territorial waters.
It's the high seas which they tried to hit, and they could only hit it imperfectly because this rule of international law that you can't extend your jurisdiction to a foreign ship. What the Act does is really to make illegal a lot of actions which would be covered generally under the words operating or participating.
Mike Stevens.
That all makes life on a pirate ship sound a bit impractical. I asked the people on the Amigo how they coped.
How'd you get your mail brought out here?
The mail goes to Spain, and we get supplies from Spain, and we get the mail, well, once a month. Sometimes the mail arrives late.
Oh.
It's always good to get it when it does arrive.
It must be a bit like being in World War III or something stuck out here.
Or in a monastery.
Or in a monastery, I was going to say. What's it like in winter? I mean, to me, it's rough enough now. I mean, you look pretty stable, but you're anchored down, aren't you?
It's a very good ship. It may look a bit rusty at the moment.
I was going to say, it looks a bit battered up your end.
It's been very well built as a radio ship. It's been very carefully designed. It was built in Texas. And as you can see, it really is remarkably stable.
Yeah, you're not bothering about. We're going up and down like a yo-yo here. Can you play whatever records you like?
Yeah. It's the only station anyway. You can play what you like, which is really nice.
What, no playlist?
Free choice.
One thing I always wanted to ask you is if you're on a boat, why doesn't the needle jump up and down on the records?
Well, it does sometimes.
What, is that a really dopey question?
No, well...
Does it move around a bit in the winter?
The ship tends to move steadily rather than very suddenly. If you bang the floor, it will jump. But if the ship is rolling, it's a gradual roll, and it's not enough to make the needle jump.
Roger, do you play tricks on each other on your shows? Because sometimes I hear you saying, oh, so-and-so's trying to jump down through the hatch and stuff. Is that all real?
Yeah, it's a bit of that goes on.
A bit of that?
Throw some boots on him.
You throw boots at him?
And those pipes, and dead fish.
I think the funniest thing we did last summer, we'd been catching sharks, and we lured a live shark down the hatch of the studio. And the disc jockey that was on the air at the time suddenly saw this quite large shark. It was about 3.5 feet, threshing around on the end of the line, and nearly had a heart attack.
Well, the Act has made it impossible to supply the Amigo from England, and theoretically everything has to be shipped there from Spain. Even more damaging, the Act makes it illegal for British firms to advertise on pirate radio. How could Caroline get round that?
The Marine Offences Act effectively just wiped out all your British advertising in Britain. It didn't block any kind of Canadian company or American company or any company around the world booking through, a legitimate, a country then that was saying it was all right to operate. And, there are, as I say, over 100 countries that say Caroline is fine.
It's 5 minutes before 2 o'clock. How would you like a Radio Caroline car sticker to put in the back of your...
Tell me about the advertisements. How do you get them?
Get a free one is send off...
Well, of course, we don't know too much about the sales office. Our main office is in Spain, but we get the text and sometimes tape for the commercials, which are brought out here with the supplies.
According to Ronan O'Reilly, most of Caroline's advertising is placed by large multinational companies through their offices in countries such as Spain. But when we contacted some of them, they had no record of placing the ads through any of their European branches. A few small British businesses seem to be advertised too. When we asked them about it, they said that the ads were an embarrassment to them and broadcast without their consent. What about the advertisements that are on Radio Caroline at the moment that invite you to send your money to Spain to buy either posters or T-shirts which say Radio Caroline and the wavelengths? Is that breaking the law, or because you send your money to Spain, is it within the Act?
I think sending your money is all right because you're not participating, in doing the broadcasting. And of course, Radio Caroline's not breaking the law because there's nobody ostensibly British national on board.
Is it an offence at the moment to actually listen to Radio Caroline?
No.
That's not illegal?
No, not yet. I don't think it will be. Because that would make everybody look so silly. I mean, it would be like Russia and Czechoslovakia or Nazis during the war.
One thing you mustn't do, though, according to the Act, is anything which could be viewed as promoting the interests of an illegal station. This could make it against the law for you to wear a Caroline T-shirt, on the grounds that you might draw the station to the attention of people who hadn't known about it before. This law also makes it quite difficult for us to discuss the questions raised by the continuing presence of pirate radio. However, Caroline exists today because it avoids prosecution under the Marine Offences Act, although achieving this obviously makes life much more difficult for the people running it. But why should anyone bother to listen? What are they getting from Caroline that they can't get from the existing government-authorised stations like Capital?
The difference with Caroline in the 70s to Caroline in the 60s is that it's largely where it was sort of pop, top pop kind of thing, single thing. It is now an album station. It plays nothing but album tracks. And so it's kind of, it's a different ball game. If you go around any of the big record shops today and ask them what 80% of their sales are, 80% of their sales are albums. I mean, that is a reality. And yet the entire market is geared, you know, the whole selling